The Galactic Court was a place of unmatched grandeur, a symbol of unity and governance among the countless species that made up the Galactic Federation. It was located on the neutral planet of Zagzal Rhea, an ancient world covered in towering crystalline structures that glistened under the light of 3 suns. This planet was home to the most important legal body in the known universe, where disputes between species, trade agreements, and the rare political trial were settled by a diverse panel of alien judges. That morning, the court buzzed with a palpable tension. A critical case involving the J-Corps, a reclusive and powerful alien race known for their advanced technology and almost impenetrable legal system, had brought representatives from across the galaxy. The J-Corps were notorious for their complex laws, and for centuries their legal codes had baffled even the sharpest minds in galactic jurisprudence. Their legal system, written in dense, ancient scripts, was incomprehensible to all but their own kind. And today the court was grappling with a trade dispute that could either solidify peace or spark a dangerous rift among several galactic factions. The J-Corps' legal team, standing tall with their shimmering metallic exoskeletons and impassive expressions, seemed unbothered. They were confident that no one could decipher their legal codes, and they had the upper hand in this case. Opposing them were the trade delegations of the Heldor and the Var-Shah, 2 major galactic powers that had long struggled to understand the J-Corps' legal framework. In the middle of this chaotic legal battlefield stood Jacob Marshall, an unassuming human from Earth. Jacob was a legal scholar who had been brought into the case almost as a last resort. The other representatives from the more advanced civilizations had already written him off, some even snickering at the thought of a human, a species that had only recently joined the Galactic Federation, attempting to interpret the J-Corps' incomprehensible legal system. But Jacob, despite the doubts surrounding him, was determined. He had come to prove that sometimes it wasn't about how advanced a species was, but how one approached a problem. As the court session began, the Grand Arbiter, a towering figure with translucent skin that shimmered in various shades of green, called for order. His deep, resonant voice echoed through the vast chamber. The court will now hear the final arguments in the case of Heldor Trading Consortium versus the J-Corps Confederation. The matter pertains to the alleged violation of galactic trade laws concerning the transit and taxation of goods across neutral space. The J-Corps, as defendants, have invoked their ancient legal codes, which must be interpreted by this court for a final ruling. We call upon the legal representatives of all parties to present their cases. The lead attorney for the Heldor, an imposing creature with scaled skin and sharp teeth, approached the podium. His voice was a guttural growl as he presented his case, relying heavily on the standard galactic trade laws, which clearly outlined that all participating members of the Federation were to abide by certain regulations when transporting goods through neutral territories. He argued passionately that the J-Corps had violated these regulations by imposing unauthorized taxes on goods passing through their space. Next, it was the J-Corps' turn. Their lead representative stepped forward, his metallic exoskeleton glinting under the courtroom lights. He raised a hand, and with a single flick of his wrist, a holographic display of ancient J-Corps texts filled the air. The script was unreadable to most lines of intricate, looping symbols that seemed to twist and morph before the eyes. The J-Corps lawyer spoke in a calm, measured tone, invoking their right to enforce their own laws within their territory. He argued that the J-Corps legal system predated the formation of the Galactic Federation and, as such, took precedence in their own space. It was a masterstroke of legal strategy. No one in the court could definitively argue against a system they couldn't even begin to understand. The room fell silent. The judges, representatives from various races, exchanged uneasy glances. This was the crux of the problem. The J-Corps legal codes had remained an impenetrable mystery for millennia, and no one had been able to fully decipher them. The other galactic powers had always avoided directly challenging the J-Corps because of this very issue. It was like trying to play a game where only one side knew the rules. As the J-Corps representative finished his argument, the Grand Arbiter turned to the Heldor, and Varsha delegations. Does the prosecution have any final arguments? The Heldor attorney looked defeated. His earlier confidence had waned, and he simply shook his head, stepping back from the podium. The Varsha representative did the same. It seemed that once again the Jacor would walk away victorious, protected by their cryptic legal shield. That's when Jacob Marshall stood up. The courtroom turned as one to look at the human, many with incredulous expressions. Jacob was young by most alien standards, barely in his 30s, and his appearance was unremarkable compared to the more exotic creatures in the room. But he exuded a quiet confidence as he made his way to the podium. "Your Honor," Jacob began, addressing the Grand Arbiter, "I would like to present a new interpretation of the Jacor legal system." There were murmurs throughout the courtroom. Many of the alien representatives whispered to one another, some clearly amused at the idea of a human and earthling, no less attempting to solve a problem that had stumped the greatest minds in the galaxy. The Grand Arbiter raised a hand for silence. "Proceed," he said, his tone curious. Jacob nodded and gestured toward the holographic display of the Jacor legal text still hanging in the air. For centuries, we've been approaching the Jacor legal system as if it were similar to our own. We've assumed that their laws are based on logic, rules, and regulations as we understand them. But the Jacor, in their culture, do not see the universe the way we do. Their legal system is not based on logic, it's based on metaphor. The room fell silent. Jacob continued, "The Jacor's laws are not literal. They're allegorical. They reflect their deep connection with nature and the balance of elements. Their laws are meant to mirror the natural world, where everything is interconnected and in constant motion. What we see as contradictions or complexities in their legal texts are actually representations of cycles in nature: birth, death, renewal, the elements." He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. When we stop trying to read their laws literally and instead approach them as allegories, patterns begin to emerge. For example, the law they've invoked to justify the taxation of goods passing through their space is not about taxes at all. It's about the flow of energy like a river that nourishes the land as it passes through. The Jacor believe that they are entitled to a portion of the resources that pass through their space because, in their view, they contribute to the balance and flow of the galaxy. They see themselves as the river that feeds the larger ecosystem of interstellar trade. The courtroom was now entirely focused on Jacob, their earlier skepticism turning into curiosity. "If we interpret their laws in this way," Jacob said, "we can start to see that many of the so-called contradictions or loopholes in their system are intentional. They're meant to reflect the natural cycles of give and take, ebb and flow. The Jacor aren't imposing taxes to enrich themselves, they believe they're maintaining the balance of the galaxy's economy, just as a river maintains the balance of the ecosystem it flows through." He paused again, letting the room absorb the information. "So in this case, we're not dealing with a violation of trade laws as we understand them. We're dealing with a difference in philosophy, a different way of viewing the universe. And once we understand that, we can begin to bridge the gap between their legal system and ours." The Grand Arbiter leaned forward, his translucent skin shimmering with interest. "And how do you propose we move forward, given this interpretation?" Jacob smiled slightly. "I believe the solution lies in recognizing the Jacor's view of balance. They aren't opposed to trade or cooperation, but they see it as a natural process. If we can create a framework that honors their perspective of balance, allowing them to feel that they are contributing to the galactic ecosystem, while also respecting our own trade regulations, we can find a compromise." The room was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, the murmurs began again, but this time they were different. No longer mocking or dismissive, the alien representatives were now discussing Jacob's interpretation with serious consideration. The Jacor representative, who had remained stoic throughout the proceedings, finally spoke. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of respect in his tone. "You understand more than most, human," he said. "Perhaps there is wisdom in your words." As Jacob stepped back from the podium, he could feel the weight of the moment. He had just opened a door that had been closed for centuries. Whether it led to a peaceful resolution or something more dangerous, only time would tell. But for now, the first step had been taken. The silence in the galactic court was heavy, as if the air itself had thickened with the weight of Jacob Marshall's words. Representatives from dozens of alien races sat in stunned contemplation, each processing the humans' groundbreaking interpretation of the J-Core legal system. The very idea that their cryptic laws were based on metaphors rooted in nature had upended centuries of assumptions. The J-Core themselves, usually inscrutable in their metallic, insect-like composure, seemed taken aback, their eyeless faces tilting ever so slightly in what could be perceived as a form of curiosity or acknowledgement. Jacob returned to his seat, his heart still pounding from the adrenaline of his speech. Though outwardly calm, he knew the magnitude of what had just occurred. For the first time in galactic history, the impenetrable J-Core legal codes had been breached not by force, but through understanding. And now, the galactic court stood on the brink of an entirely new reality. As the murmurs grew louder, the Grand Arbiter raised a translucent hand, calling for order. His voice, deep and resonant, cut through the whispers. "Order in the court," he commanded, his emerald-hued skin shimmering slightly in the chamber's artificial light. "The human representative has presented a compelling interpretation of the J-Core legal system. Before we proceed further, we must allow the J-Core to respond." All eyes shifted toward the J-Core delegation. Their lead representative, a tall and slender figure with a metallic exoskeleton that gleamed in the soft light, rose slowly. His movements were deliberate, calculated, befitting the mysterious race that had always operated with an air of cold detachment. When he spoke, his voice was calm and measured, a stark contrast to the tension in the room. "You have indeed uncovered an essential truth about our legal system, human," the J-Core representative began, his segmented mandibles clicking softly as he articulated each word. "For centuries, we have guarded our laws not out of secrecy, but out of necessity. Our legal system, as you have deduced, is not merely a set of rules but a reflection of the natural cycles that govern all life." The room remained silent, hanging on every word. However, the J-Core representative continued, his voice taking on a darker tone. "There is more to our laws than mere metaphors. What you have deciphered is only the surface layer. Beneath it lies a deeper truth, one that has been kept hidden for millennia, not only from outsiders but even from most of our own people." Jacob's pulse quickened. He had known there was something more, something elusive that he couldn't quite grasp, but what the J-Core representative was suggesting now was far more dangerous than he had anticipated. The J-Core representative turned to address the entire court. "Our legal system, based on natural cycles, was not designed solely for governance. It is a fail-safe, a safeguard that we put in place long ago, when our civilization first expanded into the stars. Our laws are tied not just to nature as a concept, but to the very fabric of reality itself." The room erupted in whispers. Representatives from various species exchanged nervous glances, their faces betraying confusion and concern. The idea that the J-Core's legal system was somehow linked to the laws of the universe itself was both terrifying and incomprehensible. The Grand Arbiter leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Explain yourself," he demanded, his voice laced with caution. The J-Core representative did not hesitate. When our ancestors first ventured beyond our homeworld, they encountered forces they could not fully understand, forces that could not fully understand, forces that defied the laws of physics, time, and space. These forces, which we now know to be remnants of an ancient, long-extinct civilization, had the power to manipulate reality itself. Our ancestors, fearing that these forces could one day be unleashed again, devised a system of laws that would keep them contained. He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. Our legal codes are designed to maintain the balance between these forces. Each law, each regulation, is a symbolic representation of a natural cycle, yes, but also a lock. A lock that keeps these ancient powers from being unleashed upon the galaxy once more. Jacob's mind raced. What the HFY representative was describing was beyond anything he could have imagined. He had thought he was dealing with an arcane and difficult legal system, but now he realized that the stakes were far higher than a simple trade dispute. The HFY's legal system wasn't just about governance, it was about survival, and the entire galaxy had been unknowingly teetering on the edge of catastrophe for millennia. The Grand Arbiter's voice broke through Jacob's thoughts. And what does this mean for the case before us? The HFY representative turned his gaze back to the Arbiter. The case before us is insignificant compared to the potential consequences of what has just occurred. By deciphering our laws, the human representative has inadvertently unlocked one of the first layers of these ancient safeguards. If we proceed without caution, we could trigger a cascade of events that would unbind these forces, threatening the entire galaxy. A cold chill ran down Jacob's spine. He had thought he was simply helping to resolve a trade dispute, but now it seemed that his actions had set something far more dangerous into motion. The courtroom was now in an uproar. Representatives from all corners of the galaxy shouted over one another, their voices filled with fear and confusion. Some called for the case to be dismissed entirely, while others demanded that Jacob be held accountable for the potential consequences of his actions. The HFY delegation, however, remained silent, watching the chaos unfold with an eerie calmness. Amid the growing chaos, the Grand Arbiter stood up, his towering figure casting a long shadow across the chamber. "Enough," he bellowed, his voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics. The room fell silent once more. "We will not allow panic to rule this court," he continued, his voice firm and authoritative. "The situation is grave, but it is not beyond our control. We must proceed with caution and wisdom." The Grand Arbiter turned his gaze toward Jacob, his eyes narrowing. "Human, you have brought us to the precipice of a great danger. But you have also uncovered a truth that has eluded us for centuries. You will now have the opportunity to assist us in containing this threat. Do you accept this responsibility?" Jacob felt the weight of the Arbiter's words pressing down on him. He had never imagined that his actions would lead to this, but now he had no choice. The fate of the galaxy might very well rest in his hands. "I accept," Jacob said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at the edges of his mind. The Grand Arbiter nodded. "Very well. We will now recess to deliberate on how to proceed. But know this: any further action must be taken with the utmost care. The HFY's legal system is not to be trifled with. One wrong step could bring about untold devastation." With that, the Grand Arbiter adjourned the court, and the representatives began to file out of the chamber, their faces etched with worry. Jacob remained seated for a moment, his mind racing as he tried to process the enormity of what had just transpired. The HFY representative approached him, his metallic body reflecting the dim light of the now empty chamber. "You did well, human," the HFY said, his voice softer than before. "But be warned, this is only the beginning. The forces you have uncovered are beyond your understanding, and they are not to be taken lightly." Jacob looked up at the HFY, his heart pounding in his chest. "What happens now?" The HFY's mandibles clicked softly as he responded. "Now, we must find a way to reseal the locks you have unlocked, and pray that we are not too late." As the HFY turned and walked away, Jacob stood up and left the chamber, his mind still reeling from the revelation. He had come to the Galactic Court to settle a trade dispute, but now he found himself at the center of a cosmic threat that could unravel the very fabric of the galaxy. Outside, the suns of Sal Rie were setting, casting long shadows across the towering crystalline structures. The beauty of the scene was lost on Jacob as he walked through the streets, deep in thought. The weight of his responsibility pressed down on him like a heavy burden, but he knew he had no choice but to carry it. The fate of countless worlds now rested in his hands. As he made his way back to his quarters, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far larger than he could comprehend. The Jacques legal system was not just a code of laws, it was a key to a greater mystery, one that could either bring about salvation or doom. And Jacob Marshall, an ordinary human from Earth, had become its unlikely guardian,